I really want to start off by saying that the NCRP program has really been an amazing, life-changing, and life-affirming decision for me. I started off with the thought that this program would assist me in my professional development, not even really thinking about how it would assist me in my personal life, which is amazing, but thinking that this would assist me in my professional development, understanding negotiation tactics better, and mediations, providing me with mediation skills. But it has really been just an amazing program, and in it I found, I believe, more than a profession, but really a vocation. So with that said, let's move into this final oral exam. So I have to say that I both anticipated and dreaded this final class, this portfolio process. And part of what I think where my anxiety came was in the choosing of a research topic. This is obviously not the first research paper that I've written for the program, but wanting to really do something different than what I had written on, and really wanting to do something that I felt was really important, relevant, and close to my heart and reflected who I am. And so I had a little bit of a struggle figuring out what I wanted to research and write about. But prayerfully, this topic came to me, and it was just opened my eyes to so many different avenues. And I think it's just really the beginning. As a Christian, as a member of the Christian community of faith, the church is important to me. It's important to God. He sent His Son who gave His life for the church. And so, as a Christ follower, as a member of this community, the church is important to me. And not long ago, I was involved in a church split. And I never thought I'd be involved in it. I was raised in the church. Mostly all my family are Christians, and came from a lot of pastors and ministers and elders and missionaries. And I never thought that I would see something like this up close and personal, but I did. And it really deeply affected me, and it really changed me. And it also really opened me up to the value from my personal life, not just as a profession per se, but really the value in the concepts and the principles and the practices that I've been blessed to learn and be exposed to and engage with and struggle with in this program. Churches are splitting at a high rate in this country, and I think that's happening for a myriad of reasons. I mean, at the core is conflict and the inability, really, of the church to resolve it, which is so sad and so heartbreaking to me, because the church, the Bible, the Word of God talks about Christians being in the ministry of reconciliation, and yet our ability to actually put that into practice has really been lacking, and really we've fallen short in that area. I believe that in order to begin to deal with this issue of church splits, there are a few things that we need to do. The first step is educational awareness. Now, I can say for myself, I have never really heard this issue discussed in my congregation. I had never heard this issue discussed in my previous congregation where the church split occurred. And I think we know from various areas of our life that one of the first downfalls, and one of the first ways where we can see history just continue to repeat itself is when we don't know what the history is, and we're not aware of what's going on. We're not aware of our likeliness to be involved in what's going on. And I think that is really a key problem within our Christian communities of faith. I think a lot of us live in a bubble. and I don't think it's unique to this community. I think a lot of us are aware of different things that happen that we see on the news, but we always think, oh, it will never happen to me. Or so that if we are aware of it, we're still not really understanding the likelihood of it happening to us. We don't have the proper tools to stop it from happening to us, and we haven't practiced it. We don't even know where to go and where to begin when it happens. So I think the first step for combating this issue of church split is education about the issues. Talking about it, helping people understand that this is a huge issue of concern that is going on all around us, and that if we don't take measures to safeguard ourselves, we will be one of those statistics. So that's the first step. I believe the second step is really gaining an understanding about how God views conflict, how God views unresolved conflict, how God views a lack of reconciliation within his body, within the body of Christ. If we are members of this community, then we have to understand what the principles, the values are of this community. And God is pretty clear, theology is pretty clear about where God stands and ultimately where we should stand on having enough compassion to care enough about one another and about the relationship that we have with one another, that we will go to whatever lengths it may be to be reconciled, to restore a right relationship. And so in this process where we're talking about our second step towards dealing with this issue, we have to understand, first of all, what reconciliation is and how God views it. When we're in interpersonal relationships, they're unique, and they often are plagued with strife and conflict because we're in close community with one another. And we know that conflict comes out of a difference of opinions, a difference of perspective, having different worldviews, having a changing worldview, right? And so when we're in an interpersonal relationship with one another, it's challenging. It could be very challenging because we're going to be most of the time in a constant relationship. It's not like a business meeting where we may meet one or two or three times around a certain business transaction. It's very different than that. This is an ongoing relationship that may span over our lifespan and through life cycles. So it's a unique situation where the conflict, if left unaddressed, can blow up into an escalating conflict and a division. The relationship between us as believers, as brothers and sisters in Christ, which is how the church often refers to one another, is very important. And it's one that, if we understand the principles of reconciliation and restoration, we should be reconciled to one another. We are supposed to love one another. We should not be so entrenched in our positions that we lose sight of who we are in relation to one another and in relation to God. So the second step is definitely to understand God's perspective and understand reconciliation and restoration and God's perspective on conflict amongst believers. I think the third step, which has to follow that, is to develop a plan. And we know that a lot of the negativity that we experience, the negative conflict that we experience in our personal relationships, as well as in our professional relationships, they stem from the lack of a plan. So we started off talking about education and awareness. So that comes from knowing and being aware that there is a problem. And once we're aware that there is a problem, we then have to understand how God views that problem as Christian communities of faith. And then thirdly, we need to develop a plan to address the problem. It's one thing to know something, it's another thing to do something. And developing a plan comes from, number one, recognizing the initial stages of conflict, being able to recognize when it looks like something is getting ready to happen, something's getting ready to erupt, being able to see where we are in that stage so that we can jump in and prevent it from escalating into a full-blown, fully escalated conflict situation. So being trained to recognize the steps. The second really, really important thing is creating a space for dialogue and creating a space for active listening. So the great thing about dialogue is that the dialogue is not just a conversation, which is what I've learned throughout this program. It's not a simple conversation. It's not a lecture. It's not just a statement of purpose or belief. It's not simply a training. It is a process that involves both the speaker and the listener equally. So it's a back and forth. It's a process that while I'm speaking, the other person is actively listening. And while they're speaking, I'm actively listening. But even while I'm speaking, I'm still actively listening and paying attention to the cues, to the physical cues that we all manifest, knowingly or unknowingly. So it's an awareness. It's being fully aware, keeping aware of the circumstance, and keeping aware of the other person. It's getting our minds just off of ourselves, right? And getting our minds on there. And it's a skill. I mean, it's one that I'm still learning, and I believe that it will be a lifelong learning process on how to really have effective dialogue, how to really effectively listen actively to other individuals who I'm in community with. And so that's going to be a really, really, really important stage in our development of our plan, is creating a space, whether it be a meeting that happens quarterly, whether it be in our actual weekly service or weekly Bible study, but it's creating a space in a culture where open dialogue, asking questions are a part of the culture. They're looked for, they're anticipated, they're valued. Creating a space for that will inevitably help people to begin to talk about things, get things out in the open before they escalate. The other thing is to really explain, in developing that plan, is to really explain the principles of conflict resolution, the principles of peace building, the principles of mediation and reconciliation. So within that plan, to really explain the principles there, to explain to folks why this is important, why we're doing this, why we have a plan, what this plan entails in terms of helping to lead us towards a growth experience in a conflict, which is basically a difference of opinion versus a negative experience. The fourth step, I believe, would be transparency. I think it's important for especially leadership, as well as individuals, congregants, to be transparent, to be honest. Oftentimes, and I saw this in my research, what happens is, at the onset of a conflict, a lot of it is just an individual or producer having a question. And they have this question, and this question they believe is in conflict or, to what it is that they've heard, or what it is that, maybe the majority of the community is saying. But out of fear of isolation, out of fear of rejection, they kind of keep this question to themselves. And the sad thing about it is their fear, oftentimes is a real fear. Because we see in the research where as people question, as people bring things up, they're often shut down pretty quickly. They're often seen as being a troublemaker. They're often seen, it puts them in a negative light. And so this is why we have to create a transparent environment where people are being real, where people are free to really express their beliefs, their questions. And I believe that this is really the model that the Bible shows us. This is the model that God showed us when he was here on earth. The disciples had questions. He did not turn them away. He did not shut them down. He answered their questions. He didn't stop even children from coming to him. We go out and questions children. He told them to not to stop them. He never turned away questions. So I don't know why we do that. I don't know if it's out of fear. There are multiple reasons, but it's not a good practice. And second one is to stop. Is the fifth step, I believe, to help mitigate church split is going to be just an ongoing education and practice. We have to make this an ongoing thing. It's not a one-time conference. It's not a one-time, sermon. It has to be an ongoing practice. It needs to be the principles of mediation and conflict resolution and reconciliation have to be woven into the fabric of the church community, of the congregation. And the way that happens is that it's an ongoing conversation. It's an ongoing training and education. It's an ongoing practice. It's something that in every ministry, in every meeting, that it's present in the way that we deal with one another, in the way that we dialogue with one another, in the way that we ask and answer questions, in the way that we listen to one another. And so I think that those are some steps to begin to mitigate this issue of church split. So as we begin to move towards our second question, which addresses the issue of 20 to 30-year-olds kind of separating themselves from the church, I believe really that if we create communities, like we just talked about, where active listening, open dialogue is encouraged, where there's transparency, where we're encouraged as individuals and we're cared for as individuals, where people are valued and really listened to, that will begin to get that age group back alive. Now let me just kind of back up a little bit. So over the past couple of days I've done a little bit of research because I really wasn't particularly familiar with this kind of exodus of 20 to 30-year-olds within the church. But as I began to really read up on it and do a little bit of research about this issue, I wasn't really surprised. I mean, I can say even for myself as a 30-something, I have seen not a lot, but I've seen some of my friends kind of move away from the church, not renounce their faith or become, atheists per se, but just have a difficult time finding a place where they fit. And I think that's really what this comes down to, is that these young adults are finding, today's young adults are finding it hard to find a place for themselves. This is not a new issue. Historically, 20 to 30-somethings have kind of drifted away from the church, and then they end up coming back, in their 40s or so, especially when they have a family. So it's not a new issue, but it's an issue that's getting worse. And I think it goes back to a little bit about what we talked about earlier, which is the lack of education, the lack of awareness. And when we're not educated and we're not aware, the problem just continues to persist, and it continues to be left kind of in this little box in the dark, in the corner, in the closet. But it grows and grows, and before we know it, the box is bursting open because we've tried to ignore it, but that just doesn't work. And so I think that's why we're looking at today, where we're having double the amount of folks leaving in that age group than their parents, and triple the amount than their grandparents. But I do believe that there are several ways that we can address this from an NCRP perspective. Let me first say, one of the big issues and one of the big reasons why that group leaves has to do with not feeling engaged or connected with the larger church as a whole. So just to give a little bit of background, as things are beginning to change now, but what has been going on over the last 10 to 20 years, and I can say for myself growing up as a youth, it was going on then, was youth were kind of segregated from the main church. So youth groups that turned into like youth church, and who had their own youth pastor, and so youth were really separated from the church. And so as you get out, you graduate from high school, you get out of youth group, right? So now you're an adult, and so you're supposed to be assimilated back into the main congregation. And that is where we're seeing the trouble. That is where we're seeing a lot of folks say, you know what, I've graduated out of youth church, my youth pastor is no longer, my pastor, so, kind of not really interested in kind of joining the larger congregation. And so we have to begin to look at is why. Why is that? There are a lot of reasons why, but we're going to address a few issues. So one of the issues is that, one of the things that we need to do is we have to demystify the church experience, right? We have to demystify church, specifically for that age group, really for everybody, but specifically for that age group. And I found, as I was looking at this and thinking about this, I found really a direct correlation between alternative dispute resolution processes and really even how the alternative dispute resolution movement, arose in our society and kind of what needs to happen in the church. So as we know, the alternative dispute resolution arose partially for a myriad of reasons, but one of the larger reasons was because people were really frustrated with the formal adjudication system. They were frustrated with the legal system. They felt marginalized. They felt, unheard. They felt like they weren't really getting solutions to their problem. People were really frustrated with this system that for a lot of folks was and is a mystery. In order to even really participate in the system, you have to be able to hire somebody else who's been trained to, for 3 years of formal legal education, minimum, right? To be able to really kind of try and to really be able to access this process. And so for a lot of folks, the legal system was a mystery. And that's one of the reasons why I think alternative dispute resolution has been so successful. And it's one of the reasons why the movement really rose up in the way that it did, is because this was a process that people felt that they could actually have access to. We say that we all have access to the legal system, but really we don't. I mean, really, I know even myself, having had a year of formal legal training at law school, and then, being a fairly educated person, I'm confounded by legal documents a lot of the time. When I consider not I consider an attorney. And so the average person who is not an attorney, they feel like this process the legal process is a mystery. And I think that's a lot of what our youth, our young adults are experiencing with the church, is when they try to engage, when they try to kind of access their understanding and access kind of church tradition and different theological perspectives, they feel the process is a mystery. And a lot of that comes from traditions, from a lot of churches being steeped in traditions. A lot of churches are priest or pastor-centered. A lot of where they kind of set this pastor priest step in a way that they're not approachable. And so young adults aren't able to engage with the church. They're not able to feel connected. It becomes kind of like a mystery. You come in and you do certain things, you sit at certain times, you stand at certain times, you speak at certain times, you don't speak at other times, and there's no real discussion, rationale to why you do it. A lot of young people are either shut down when they try to ask questions, or there's no space that has been created for them to even ask a question. And so you see a lot of parallels between kind of the issues that the legal system was having, the formal adjudication system was having when the ADR movement arose, and the issues that the traditional church is having, where now we have to take a different perspective on how to create, communities and create environments where engagement happens, where connectedness happens, where questions are welcomed and answered, where people are touchable, where there's transparency. These are the things that we have to demystify this church process in a way where young adults feel like they are a part and they are valued. And so the demystifying the process and the connectivity and the engagement are going to be key principles that we garner, that we grab from NCRP, that we grab from alternative dispute resolution processes that we can use to help to attract this generation. It was an interesting, I looked at a lot of different things over the last couple of days around this issue. And one of the things that I read was a blog by a young woman who is a seminary student. And she was talking about one of her seminary classes where one of the other students in the class, who was like in her 50s or so, prepared a sermon, and she prepared a sermon on PowerPoint. And as she began to present her sermon, she said, I prepared my sermon on PowerPoint because, I know we need to really try and reach, we're losing our 20 to 30 somethings, and we really want to reach them. And so I know, I thought PowerPoint would be the way to go. And the other student in the class, who was actually writing the blog, said that she had to kind of speak up, for herself or for the other three students in the class and say, hey, like, this is not it. Like, PowerPoint is not going to reach anybody in my age group any better than any other form of dialogue. And she began to kind of explain, like, this is the problem. There is no communication between the older generation and this younger generation. Instead, what we find a lot of the older generation making assumptions about what these 20 to 30 somethings want and what they need and what they can do. And it goes back to the core problem, which is that there's not an engagement, there's not a space for a dialogue, there's not a space for active listening, there's not a space created where we actually hear from this group to find out like what they want. And one of the things that the examples of that is, you have a lot of churches now developing, a lot of just multimedia, a lot of, kind of making a like concert-ish, club-ish, kind of, around the music at least, experience. And when you really talk to students, when you really talk to young adults in that age group, that's actually not what they want. They're not looking for more social media and more multimedia. They get that enough all day, every day. They're bombarded with it. What they're looking for is real connection, real dialogue, real engagement. What they're looking for is to be valued. And I think that the NCRP process can really speaks towards that. The whole development of ADR processes, of mediation, speaks to valuing a person, self-determination, autonomy. These are key aspects of mediation, and it speaks to valuing the individual, valuing what they have to bring to the table, valuing it enough to listen, valuing it enough to allow them to steer the process, and so these are huge things that I think would help in attracting them. One of the other things that I take from the NCRP program and I think could be applied and used to help attract that age group is the idea that, church is a lifestyle, is not a building. And, one of the things that I've learned in this program was that peace building and being a peacemaker is really a lifestyle. It's not a profession. It's not something that you kind of turn on and work, for a few hours and then turn off when you get home. To really be, I believe, effective, it's something that you have to live and breathe. It has to become who you are. And I think that that's one of the things that we have to help that, particularly that age group, kind of understand. And let me back up and say that's one of the things that age group does understand. And I think it's one of the things that turns them off from the, so the other generations where they feel like what they see is like, a lot happening within the church walls, but not a lot happening within their communities. And what that, based upon what I'm looking at, what that age group wants to see is something happening within their community. They want it to be a lifestyle. They don't want it to be something that you turn on and turn off. They want to live and breathe their faith and their values, and and being a Christ follower. It's not just something that happens in a building on Sunday morning. And so I think that in looking at the principles of peace and conflict studies, we can draw from that. We can draw from the idea that this is a lifestyle, it's a vocation, it's a way of being. It's a practice, it's a skill, it's a way of being and knowing that should translate from your home to your job to your other interpersonal communities. It should transcend space and community and certain times and that sort of thing. And so I think that's one of the other big things that we can take from NCRP, apply to the church, and really begin to engage with our lives. Now, in relation to the last question, I thought it was so interesting, that it is that the best and the worst of conflict is related to religion. And, it's a sad reality, but I do believe that it is a true reality. And I think where that comes from is, if we look at the history specifically of AU, we can see that a lot of the principles and the practices are rooted in Judeo-Christian tradition. As I showed throughout my paper, the idea of reconciliation and restoration really comes from the Bible. God speaks about it throughout the Bible. He speaks about restoring the right relationship, being reconciled to one another as well as to God. But we also see, right, both in the Bible and in the world, that there's a lot of conflict around religion. And I think there's a myriad of reasons for that. One is people are so impassioned and really enthralled in their ideas and their positions that they kind of lose. They really lose. They know the what, but they don't really understand how to really live out what they know. So it's one thing to know something, but again, it's another thing to do it. It's one thing to kind of know what the Bible says, but it's another thing to do what it says. And I think what happens is people know what they know, and they hold on to what they know, but they don't understand that what they do really is what speaks to what they really believe. Right? And so it's a sad situation that um, that some of the most difficult conflict comes out of religion. I believe that by educating one another, by providing awareness, by really explaining God's view of reconciliation, by creating a space where there's engagement, where there's open dialogue, where there is transparency, where there's active listening, where there is a plan, a process, and continually talking about these principles of reconciliation, of peace building, and really beginning to live them and live and breathe them. I believe that can change. I don't think that it has to be that way. That religion, is both kind of the foundation of a lot of the principles and processes of alternative dispute resolution, but also, is one of the big major reasons why we need, conflict resolution. I don't think it has to be that way, but I think it's going to take a lot of work on the end of practitioners like myself who feel called to this area, who feel called to labor with the church and labor with communities of faith, and helping them to really understand foundationally why conflict is so contrary and negative conflict, and negative conflict that escalates in a way that is so hurtful and so heartbreaking, and so destructive. Why that is so contrary to what it is that we say we believe, what it is that we're fighting over, essentially. So, anyway, I think that pretty much wraps it up for me today. If there's any additional questions, please send me them. I'll do my best to answer them. It's been really my pleasure. I'm honored to be a part of the program and to just have the opportunity to share that knowledge, share what I think can help move the church forward in what it is in love of God, things that are important to God.